Greetings, it's Adam with you, Grata Non Grata, and I've been a little bit absent lately because I've been busy with life stuff, particularly doing taxes. That's always fun, right? Well, of course not, but now today I'm going to play something that is fun, and that's Star Raiders. What I would argue is one of the greatest Atari games ever made. I mean, it's always subjective, something like that. What is the greatest, what isn't? However, the thing about Star Raiders is that this really was the first killer app that existed for, I guess you could say, consoles. It definitely was for computers, as it was an early game for the Atari 400 and 800 computers, and it was able to move units, sell units. And sure, Atari was able to do that with stuff that they licensed, like Space Invaders and Pac-Man, but this was an original Atari creation, and it was actually one of the first original creations that didn't come from some arcade game that they had already designed, like Asteroids or of course, in the 70s, combat was based off of a few different arcade games like Tank and Jet Fighter and things like that. And so, Star Raiders, personally, it's really one of my absolute favorite retro games of all time. I had a ton of fun playing this when I was a kid. As I recall, the first time I played it was on the Atari 2600, which was a very respectable port, but not quite as detailed. Like, for instance, the galactic chart on the Atari 2600 version is, I think, only 16 grids, and there's only one star base, and it's just one fleet of Xylons that you're chasing, and you have to whittle them down and kill them before they get to that star base. Whereas on the original computer version, you have them spread across the galaxy, so to speak, and you have to strategize as to which ones you need to go and take out, since you have several star bases. And so there was really a lot of depth in this game, and that's what made it so appealing back in the day. And the version that I'm playing here, this is an enhanced version of the Atari 5200 model that is found on the Atari 50th Anniversary Collection. And as you can see, the overlay that they added to it, there was that soundtrack at the very beginning of it. The controls obviously modified, although admittedly they take some getting used to, since there's some controls mapped to your right thumbstick, and there's other controls mapped to buttons, and so it makes it a little bit awkward, particularly if you're used to playing with the original Atari CX40 joystick and a keyboard, or in the case of the 2600, the keypad. But this version that Digital Eclipse did, this modification, it's the best version of Star Raiders that's ever been created, I would say. And it also served as a great game for Atari 52 owners to have. Yes, again, it had been released on the 400 computer a few years prior, but one big disadvantage to the 5200, apart from the joysticks, was that it was just loaded with too many arcade ports. I mean, yeah, they were great. Space Invaders and Pac-Man and Centipede were all good games, but there was just too much in the way of arcade ports. To me, the 5200 needed more original content to really stand out, but Atari was just really obsessed with arcade ports because they sold really well back in those days, but still wasn't good enough to help the 5200 overcome some of its issues. But if you wanted a great game and you had a 5200, this was the way to go. I'd also throw in Space Dungeon, I think the only arcade port or home port of that very obscure Taito game. That's also on the 5200, which is also fantastic, particularly with the joystick coupler. But anyways, if you have, or if you've been interested in the Atari 50th Anniversary Collection and you've overlooked this particular game here, give it a play, give it a try. Do take a little bit of time to learn the controls, and of course you don't have to jump into something like Warrior difficulty like I am doing here, but still, it's such a fantastic game, and it's a little bit odd to me that Atari kind of ignored it after the 5200. I mean, yes, there was the Atari ST version, although that one was kind of weird. I've played it before. It's been years, but I just remember bubbles in space. That's what your photon torpedoes look like. And it was also in a very small... your viewport was kind of small and everything. And it's like that seemed like kind of a missed opportunity. In my opinion, the Atari should have done a port of Star Raiders to the Atari 7800 and maybe used the 7800's 320 resolution capabilities there. I'm actually a little bit surprised that nobody's ever ported that, because we've received a lot of great homebrew stuff on the 7800, lots of arcade ports and other ports. But to me, one thing that I would always wanted to see with the 7800 was more Atari 2600 translations, be it Star Raiders or Yar's Revenge or Adventure, anything like that, because the 7800 was in a way made to kind of replace, or I mean, it was made to replace not kind of, made to replace the Atari 2600, but it had vastly greater capabilities, and so it's just odd to me that they never did that. Or Solaris would be another one, which was a fantastic game on the 2600. It's too bad they didn't pay the guy who did that. He was the same guy who created Star Raiders. Should have paid him to do an Atari 7800 version as well. But yeah, there's just... I've always loved this game because it's a space simulator, and it was really the first real first-person space shooter. In fact, this is a first-person game before Battlezone. And yes, Atari had done a few other first-person games prior to even Star Raiders, like Night Driver would be one. But it was still a very early first-person shooter of a sort. The first real space simulating game where you're in a cockpit and you have graphics instead of like just text. Because I know there was like Stellar Track on the Atari 2600, but I never could get into that. Or Starship, a very early... I think it was one of the first launch titles for the 2600s. I hated that too, but made up for it with Star Raiders. But anyways, I won't talk the entire time here. I just wanted to express my love and appreciation for Star Raiders. I guess also while I'm thinking about it, there is a Star Raiders-like game for the Atari Jaguar, the famous, or I guess in some circles infamous, Battlesphere. And I picked that up back when it was first made available, and that has a version called Alone Against the Empires. And the entire game was always described by the creators as like a blend between Star Raiders and TIE Fighter. But Alone Against the Empires mode is basically Star Raiders 2000. And I mean, really, that whole game is kind of Star Raiders 2000, but you get to pick from different ships of different alien races. But Alone Against the Empires works just like Star Raiders does, and it's really good. And just the only drawback to me on Battlesphere is that the price tag of getting a cartridge is a bit up there. And so that can be tough, but that was one of the best homebrew games. I'll have to do some video of that one of these days. Unfortunately, I don't have Battlesphere Gold. I did miss out on that one. I wasn't even in the country, I think, when it was released, but I have the original, and again, great game for those who are into space combat style simulation games. And yeah, I guess in a way this is almost arcade-like. I mean, not quite. You couldn't just drop Star Raiders into an arcade machine and call it a day, because you can just sit there if you want to. But it doesn't go over the top in a lot of the elements, although I believe Star Raiders 2, which had been discovered some years ago, was going to try and do something more along those lines where you could visit planets and things like that. Oh yes, and I should also mention that there was a version, almost an arcade version of Star Raiders that was at least tested out at Atari Adventure Centers back in the early 80s. This might have been like 82, 83, somewhere around there. It had a giant projection screen and 2 seats. And I always wondered what happened to that software. If it's ever been discovered, I've not seen it mentioned on forums before. But it would be cool to me as an arcade guy to also see an arcade version of Star Raiders or figure out a way that it could have been done. But yeah, those are my thoughts on this amazing, awesome, one of the greatest Atari games ever made. What are your thoughts on it? What do you like about Star Raiders? What do you not like about Star Raiders, if anything? I do have to say, on the higher difficulties, it is extremely annoying how sometimes it seems like the game intentionally screws with you. Like, I was playing on the pilot difficulty, and or it might have been warrior, I can't remember, or commander. It was the highest one, whichever it is. And I was playing through and doing okay, but I warped into a sector when my shields were damaged, and unable to fire torpedoes, a meteor ran right through my blinking shields and killed me. It's like, it feels like the game meant to do that. It's kind of evil in that regard. But anyways, you can keep watching me play through warrior difficulty here. If you would rather see a version without me talking, then I can always upload that too. But yeah, thanks for watching this. It's only a few more minutes, I think, or several more minutes, and we'll see you around.